Welcome back to Veronica Live, and we are here with, I've never had somebody call in from this country. I'm going to say country, and we are being joined. I'm super excited about this interview. I met him in January when I was running around the Tallahassee Capitol for the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I was very impressed with this legislator, and we are so pleased to welcome Florida Representative Dr. Joel Rudman from District 3 to Veronica Live for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you for having me. It's I'm working on no sleep. I'm overseas, but yet, hey, it's an honor to be on here.
So tell everyone where you are, because when you said you wanted to come on and you were flying away, I was like, oh yeah, this is really going to work. So I'm very impressed that it all worked out. But I was trying to move you, and you're like, no, it's going to work, Veronica. So where are you, Dr. Rudman?
So it's really embarrassing to say this. I hope people don't get the wrong impression. But keep in mind, Veronica, so I've been very fortunate in my life. I've done a lot of things. I used to be a doctor for NASCAR. Now I'm a politician. Some people say I might even be a rock star. So I've been very fortunate in my life. We all have these bucket lists that we keep. Today, I am fulfilling one of the last things on my bucket list. My wife and I, we've been married for 30 years. And one of the places we always wanted to travel to and never got a chance was the Riviera, the Italian Riviera, the French Riviera, Monte Carlo.
Yes.
I know, right? You probably don't like to think of your politicians as being at the casino in Monte Carlo, but it reminds you of all the James Bond movies. For me, actually, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that movie, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Remember that one?
That was not on my bucket list.
yeah, that was the old Steve Martin, Michael Caine movie. They're shysters, they're crooks, and they're hanging out on the French Riviera. So it was, like I said, this was one place my wife and I always wanted to come to, and it's great to be here. And again, you got to cut me some slack. The bucket list means a lot more to you, Veronica, after what I've been through this last year. You probably remember when we spoke in January. I've lived through a shattered kneecap this session, and I also lived through a blood clot in my left leg. Yeah, so I take those bucket lists very seriously nowadays.
Well, we're so happy you're thriving. Plus, you survived another session in Tallahassee of the sausage making. And in January, that was my first experience seeing it up close. And you actually were my favorite politician that I met because you weren't letting people push you around, and that was the attitude that you exuded. So I want people to get to know you, Representative Rudman, because, what is your background and how did you end up in politics? Because I know that's a very interesting story.
So, Veronica, I think that's what most people find appealing about me, actually, is the fact that I don't want to be in Tallahassee. I never had any intention on being a politician. Remember, I'm a family doctor from the rural Florida panhandle. This is not a job that appealed to me, but y'all remember what we went through back in 2020, during the COVID debacle.
Right.
We literally had politicians and bureaucrats stick their noses into my business, the world of medicine. They were locking us down and using a medical excuse for the reason to lock us down. And so when people would ask me on the campaign trail, Veronica, they'd say, why is a doctor getting into politics? I would say, because politics got into medicine. That's why.
Well, and you have already, you're making an impact in Tallahassee. So talk about some of the bills because normally, when you first arrive there, and I've learned this because Representative Griffiths has been on my show probably 20 times, and what I've gathered is that when you're a baby freshman or sophomore, you don't wield the power to get things done. You do what the speaker wants you to do, but you've been, making change and getting things done. So tell us some of the stuff you've worked on.
Well, I think I've been very fortunate to have my tenure overlap with the tenure of probably arguably the best governor in the history of the United States, Governor Ron DeSantis. He understands freedom the way I understand freedom. And so I was just very fortunate, Veronica, that when I entered the legislature, the first thing on my agenda, the first thing on my mind was freeing physicians in the state of Florida. Back during the COVID era, you had people like Tony Fauci. They would criticize us. They would blackball us if we spoke against the whole COVID mantra. If we told people they were going to survive COVID, Fauci said we were liars and we should be excommunicated. So my first priority when I got to the Florida Legislature, I ran a bill called the Medical Conscience Bill that said you're not going to force a physician to do anything in their art, anything in their practice that goes against their conscience. And part of that bill included a language that said that you cannot punish, chastise, or pull a physician's license based off of his own personal political opinions or his own personal medical opinions. So we literally had doctors across Florida who were being threatened, not by the state of Florida, not by our licensure boards within the state, but by these national boards, the boards that allow us to say that we're board certified. These big national liberal organizations, when we wouldn't toe the company line on COVID, they came for us. And I'm talking, Veronica, literally hundreds of Florida doctors.
Yeah. Well, it was disgusting. So one of my questions I wanted to ask you, so did you actually get some COVID shots? I got 2, and I last year had a blood clot in my leg, and it was not fun. It wasn't the one that would kill you, but, reflecting back, I just don't want anybody to be forced to do anything that they don't want to do or lose their job because of it when it comes to vaccines.
No, you and I are exactly on the same page. I have patients who come in and they ask me, hey, when's the next COVID shot and where can I get it? And I just have to throw my hands up in the air. I say, look, you can do what you want. That's your decision. But I don't know anything about the next COVID shot. I'm not interested in it. We don't stock them here. We don't keep them. But, you can check with your local Walmart. And then, of course, we also have patients on the other end of the spectrum who see the world more like I see it. And they say, look, I'm 36 years old. I'm young. I'm healthy. I don't really need the COVID shot. Do I, Dr. Rudman? I say, of course you don't need the shot. So, we do have patients from across the political spectrums. But no, I'm just like you, Veronica. Back in the day, we were basically told that either we get the COVID shot. I actually got the Moderna, right? I got the series of 2
that's
Moderna
the one I got
back in the day.
That's me.
Yeah, because remember, Veronica, back in the day, if you're a doctor who runs a clinic and you didn't get those shots, anytime a COVID patient would walk in your clinic, the government would come in and shut you down for 2 weeks at a time. So as a private physician who's got to keep his doors open, I pretty much made a business decision. It's not that I agreed with it.
Right.
It's just that, hey, this is what I had to do to keep my doors open. And initially, things didn't look that bad. I know
initially I thought it was a good thing. So now, after last year, I've changed.
Yeah. For a good 6 months, I swore that, hey, okay, maybe this was worth doing. But then, of course, I caught COVID later that year, Veronica, and that really
me
just
too.
kind of flipped the script on me. Yeah. And then, like you,
we're kindred
I'm a young
spirits.
guy with a blood clot.
Yes.
I was in the opposite thing. I'm 69 years old, and I did not get the vaccination, until I was probably almost a year or year and a half after it came out, and I had to go to South Korea on a business trip, and I could not get into South Korea unless I had a COVID vaccination.
So he's our JJ guy.
Yeah, so I got the Johnson & Johnson because it was one shot, but I went and got a blood test before I went and got that shot, and I tested negative for the antibody. So I've never had COVID. And it was like, that was my decision to make it. I didn't like the experimental stuff that was going on. I didn't want somebody experimenting on me and all the crap. When they sit there and they criticize these world-renowned virologists, from Johns Hopkins and all these Stanford. I mean, these people know what they're doing, right? And they were being criticized as being quacks. And it was just astonishing to watch the takedown. But why is it that they use the doctors to advance the social stuff, like the gun stuff? It still perplexes me why the government would order doctors to inquire about people's guns, when they come in for a visit. What is
so
it with
true.
trying to use the government or use doctors for this kind of stuff?
That's a fascinating question because it segues right into another one of my bills this session. So apparently, long before I got to the legislature, as you were saying, there was this thing about the leftists and the liberals kind of using medicine as a way to push their social agenda. They had doctors asking you, "Do you have guns in the house? Where do you keep them?" And apparently, in the state of Florida, in the halls of Tallahassee, that was called docs against Glocks or docs and Glocks, something like that. Well, guess what, guys? This last session, I ran a Second Amendment bill limiting how long your government can withhold your firearm from you, to basically, we're still going to let them do background checks when you purchase a firearm, but they're not going to take longer than 3 business days max. That's a limit that my bill was going to put on those background checks. And guess what, guys? We flipped that whole docs and Glocks thing on its head. We had people roaming the halls of the Capitol say, "Oh, now it's docs with Glocks. Now you guys are in favor of Glocks."
Well, and that's one of the questions we always ask politicians is, your stance on the red flag laws. And then I saw an interview that you actually toured the Marjorie, what is it? What's the school called,
Marjorie
John?
Stoneman Douglas.
Yes. So I wanted you to talk about that experience. What was that like? And, because my thing, John and I are just huge gun people. And why do they always have to they want to take my weapons when some wackadoodle that had been arrested 17 times that should have not had a gun, he's the problem, not me. So you toured the school and I guess met with the families. What was that experience like and how did that change you?
So, boy, that's a really good question because I think when you look at these questions, Veronica, that we've been going over, there's a common thread through everything we've talked about so far, and that common thread is freedom. It's individual liberties, right? It's personal choice. Kind of like we said with the vaccine. Hey, if you choose to get vaccinated 24 times, God bless you, but I'm not going to.
Right.
But again, I think it's important that we respect each other's boundaries and respect each other's freedoms. And the same is certainly true, as you said, with the Second Amendment. These bills that I run, these beliefs that I have, there's a unifying thread that flows through every bill that I sponsor, and that's protecting the rights of the individual. And like you said, I knew I was going to run this Second Amendment bill, so I wanted to be sure. In my heart, I know I was doing the right thing by running these bills. I know that this was an overreaction on the part of the legislature back in 2018, and who can blame them, right? They just had a tragedy unfold as they're in session. So we're certainly not pointing blame at anyone, but, when you go back with the benefit of hindsight, you look at some of the things that were contained in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act, I think it's safe to say, okay, at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and as you said, I've toured the facility. I've actually been down to Parkland 3 separate times. And the things that I walk away from Parkland with, Veronica, okay, yes, there were plenty of breakdowns. There were plenty of opportunities to prevent this from happening. But the one thing it wasn't a breakdown of our gun laws. It wasn't a breakdown of the fact that, the killer was below the age of 21. Look, we can't help that. Are we going to say, well, every killer is below the age of 90. Let's ban guns if you're less than 90. I mean, some of these things are just ridiculous. What it was a breakdown of, Veronica, and I'm thoroughly convinced of this, the biggest failure of all at Parkland was a failure to recognize someone in mental distress. This kid or young adult, whatever he was, he never should have been in that school in the first place. Apparently, he was given multiple opportunities, multiple chances, and everyone always knew, hey, that kid's kind of strange. That kid's kind of weird. And apparently, we sometimes as a society, we turn a blind eye to these individuals. In this case, I think even though we're talking about individual freedoms and liberties, right, there are limits. Like, for example, when you break the law, when you're a criminal, don't come crying to me about your individual freedoms and liberties that, I can't be locked up in prison because of my individual liberties. Well, no, you broke society's rules. And in this kid's case, there were multiple things in this kid's background, Veronica, where he should have been in a rubber room for the rest of his life.
And then they want to go after our guns because of his mental illness. So I'm definitely done with it. The other thing, John and we're Catholic, we're pro-life. We talk about life.
But before we get to
go
that,
ahead, Veronica,
I wanted to ask about the gun stuff and a related subject, and that's the marijuana laws. We're trying now to make recreational marijuana legal in Florida.
Please don't.
Yeah, and we've talked to some experts, before, and it's the issue about marijuana related psychosis. Never, and I never hear it come up in the debates in the legislature about legalizing this stuff. Not one word about it. And yet every time you go to these shootings, what's the common factor? Marijuana psychosis, because the kid is out there smoking pot and is going, having psychotic episodes, and then the next thing you know, they're pulling a gun and shooting people. And
not to mention it's a gateway drug to everything else. That's the other thing. I mean, we just had the state attorney from our area on, and he's met these criminals. It's definitely the gateway to other things as well.
But is the legislature
John,
look at that stuff?
So, John, you are 100% correct in everything that you just said, and I totally agree with those sentiments. Certainly, as a physician, I see it all day, every day. One of the things I used to do when my kids were little, they're grown now, they're out of the home. But when my kids were teenagers, I would come home from work every evening, and I would grab each one of my two kids, and I would say, look, whatever you do in life, that's all well and good. Just promise me you will never do drugs. Because like you say, marijuana, it is a gateway drug. Yes, it does cause psychosis. I would say, John, that, in my experience as a family practice doctor, when I would see, let's say, for example, a 17-year-old girl, high school girl who comes to see me, let's say that she's there for a psychiatric reason, and let's say on exam that she is just unusually nervous, more anxious than any 17-year-old has a right to be. I would say, John, 100% of the time, when you take a good, thorough history, you will find that these types of patients, they are not just marijuana users, they are heavy marijuana users.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely correct.
Well, so please fight for that because, it's awful.
They don't think of second and third order consequences, of these laws so often.
Right.
It's
funny. It's funny y'all bring that up. My wife and I, my wife's just as conservative as I am, if not more. Her favorite representative in the Florida Legislature was Representative Tommy Gregory this last session, because Representative Gregory had a bill. He wanted to get in front of this amendment. He wanted to go ahead and put severe restrictions in place in the state of Florida should that amendment pass. And, Representative Gregory did a great job of presenting that bill and debating it. It did pass the Florida House. I was proud to speak alongside Representative Gregory in favor of his bill restricting marijuana limits and that sort of thing in Florida. So, guys, we did try to get ahead of the problem, but let's just pray to God. Let's hope that Floridians are smarter than that. Let's hope they do not pass that awful, awful amendment.
Well, we'll cross our fingers. But back to one of my number one issues that I fight for is life and being pro-life. And Florida's we've led the way, and I always fight for 0 abortions because, it's definitely a human, and you're a doctor. And now the abortion thing, Florida's in the crosshairs again. That, this is one of they hate us for that 6-week abortion ban. So I wanted to hear your thoughts as a doctor, as a Catholic, as a pro-lifer, and representing Florida, where we need to be on this abortion issue. I'm sorry, I don't like rape, but this is a baby, and we know now. Ultrasounds are incredible. What people can see when it comes to life. So your thoughts, Doc?
So, wow, we were just talking about one awful amendment, and now we're talking about an even worse amendment, Amendment 4. And again, guys, I think as good practicing Catholics, which my wife and I are, I think we all need to get together. I think we need to pray from here on out all the way to Election Day that hopefully Floridians are smarter than that. I got to be honest with you, we honestly thought, or at least speaking for myself, I honestly thought I wouldn't have to worry about this amendment. The way the language was written, it was purposely deceitful and vague. And, my wife and we both witnessed volunteers at the local DMV in Gulf Breeze, Florida. I think we went in to get a new car tag or something, and you had these radical activists standing outside the DMV, collecting signatures. And, of course, they didn't know who I was, but they're shouting across the parking lot, "Hey, would you like to sign a petition protecting women's health?" Now, guys, if that's not deceptive, I don't know what is. The petition has nothing to do with safeguarding women's health. It has everything to do with murdering innocent babies. So, and then, of course, the language of the amendment itself is kind of confusing, kind of vague. But, guys, listen, my wife and we've been talking about this. I have already started drafting language. Should the unforgivable happen, should the unthinkable happen, and Floridians fall for this terrible amendment, I'm going to go ahead and start drafting language because, the argument they use, Veronica, they say, well, these are medical decisions. No one wants an abortion, but, this is necessary for the safety of the mother. Well, Veronica, John, between us right here, I've been a physician since 1996. I've delivered over 100 babies in my lifetime. I've never once encountered one of these nightmare scenarios that they say is just commonplace. Oh, it happens every day, happens all the time. I've never encountered that nightmare scenario where I've had to tell an expectant mother, Mom, we're going to have to terminate your pregnancy in order to save your life. It just doesn't happen, guys.
Right.
Maybe it happened back to the 1800s, but we are now well into the 21st century. These Sophie's choice scenarios, they just don't occur anymore. And I would love to propose legislation properly defining exactly what does health of the mother mean. Let's define it, and let's define it in terms where no abortion's ever going to be permitted in the state of Florida.
Well, and what's sad is that Kamala Harris has made this the White House's number one issue.
Yeah, and it was odd that the three women on the state Supreme Court voted, against the ballot language, saying it was vague and deceptive, and reading it, it's like they don't even talk about licensed physicians; they just talk about healthcare providers. A good example, and it was the men that said, "Yeah, let's put it on the ballot that it's not vague and simple subject."
Well, John, that's a good point. The other side, for better or for worse, these are the tactics that are used by the other side. They bait people, they name call, they stigmatize people. Did that weigh into some of these male Supreme Court justices' opinions? Did they not want to be called a misogynist or a sexist? I don't know. That's probably a question better asked of them. But I think Veronica can tell you. They can throw all the names in the book at me. I could honestly care less. I don't need this job. Matter of fact, this job is hurting my full-time job, which is taking care of patients in Navarre, Florida. So they can come at me as hard as they want. As Veronica said earlier, I'm not going to back down. And I think that's what scares them to death, is that they know they don't control me.
I love that.
Well, and that's what we need more of. We need legislators with backbone that will stand up to these people. Because so much of what goes on in the legislature is written by the lobbyists and the special interest, and you need people that'll stand up to this stuff.
Well, and let me tell you guys, even though it's an honor to be here and to talk to you, I don't stand alone in the legislature. Veronica, you mentioned a mutual friend of ours who stands tall as well, Representative Griffith. He's an outstanding representative. I'm honored to have him by my side. And we also have other Republican champions in my class. Again, we're all freshmen, but man, are we carrying the load. And it's only going to get better the longer we hang around. As you said, as we work our way up the hierarchy, we have the potential to really do some transformative change in the state of Florida. It's one of those things. Republican leadership is certainly a great thing, and certainly the Republicans in the state of Florida have done a great job of steering the ship. But we're ready to grab the wheel. We're ready to take charge. We're ready for our shift. And among people like myself and Representative Griffith, I want to give a shout out to people like Representative Kyanne Michael. If you don't know Representative Michael's story, look her up. She's someone who lost a child to the hands of an illegal immigrant. So she is devoting her public service to make certain that no other family has to go through the trauma and the tragedy that she did. There's Representative Kevin Steele from Central Florida. He's a businessman like me. He probably had no intention of starting a second career in politics, but yet, like me, government was getting involved in his business. And people like Kevin Steele and I were fighting back. There's Bernie Jacques, a prosecutor down there in the Tampa St. Pete Clearwater area who is a strong conservative. And then, of course, there's my friend Representative Jennifer Kennedy, who was one of the co-sponsors of that House Bill 7. And I was proud to stand with Representative Kennedy on that heartbeat bill, and I was proud to co-sponsor it as well. But we've got a whole bumper crop of freshmen who are ready to ascend the throne, ready to take the wheel, and you're just going to see some really transformative things in the next 6 years in the state of Florida.
So I gather you're supporting the term limit idea, and it seems to me, looking back at the history of the Florida Legislature, that it seems to be working well because we're getting people in there that are not lifetime legislators. They're there to do a service and then they're gone.
So the funny thing, Johnny, the term limits kind of cuts both ways. Obviously, I'm in favor of term limits. I think it's a great thing, but I'm also an impatient man. As a doctor, when you work emergency rooms, and someone's got chest pain, you don't say, well, let's stew on this for 3 days and see how we feel in the morning and see how we feel. When there's an emergency, when there's a crisis, we're used to taking immediate, decisive action. So the only problem with term limits as it exists right now in the state of Florida is that you do kind of have this hierarchy. People expect, once they're there,
Yep.
They expect to serve 4 terms in the House, and so it creates kind of like a high school system. And as Veronica explained earlier, I'm basically a freshman in that hierarchy. Well, look, I don't want to be a freshman. Time's a wasting. Like I said earlier, I've survived a blood clot and a shattered knee. I don't know how many years I have left. I don't know if I have 6 years left. So the changes I would like to make, I would like to make them today. So I almost wish, John, that, hey, okay, I'm in favor of term limits, but maybe we should have term limits of just 1 term in each chamber.
Well, that's always been one of the problems I've viewed in the legislature is one person can stop a common sense thing, and it, like Senate President Pasademo, now, and she just lost her husband in a hiking accident, I think last week or the past few days. But our prayers go out to her and her family. But she alone has blocked the open carry. Gun.
Well, and when I was up there in January, people were not a fan. They said she was not pro Second Amendment and election integrity.
Right. She single-handedly, and I've talked to the Senate presidents and a number of senators. She single-handedly blocked it, and nobody would go against. And imagine if people were only there for 1 term. And right now in the Senate, you can serve 8 years, which would be 2 terms. In the Florida House, you can serve 4 consecutive terms, which would be 8. Basically, it's 8 years in either chamber. Imagine the sense of urgency people would have, John, if they had 1 shot. You get 1 term, and that's it. If you have bold ideas, you better fight like heck for them this session because you're not going to get another shot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, Representative, about, I saw out on the web that you are pro expanding Florida's Medicaid. So I wanted you to talk on that and why you want that expansion.
Absolutely. So guys, again, being a physician, there's several things that really should not be a partisan issue, right? There's several things that every red-blooded American should be able to agree on. You would think the Second Amendment, if something's in the Bill of Rights, you would think certainly this is inarguable. Everyone should appreciate your Bill of Rights. When it comes to health care, right, we have to do the right thing. And what we're facing right now, Veronica and John, we're facing a financial decision. Every state has a government program that each state runs individually. It's called the Medicaid program. It's for the poor. It's for the indigent. It's for the permanently disabled. Now, I know a lot about Medicaid because I am the guardian of my older sister who's in her 60s. She is on Florida Medicaid. She has had daily seizures since she was 5 years old. Something happened to her at age 5 where she has never basically progressed since age 5. So there are mental issues, there are emotional issues. Someone has to care for her. So I am her guardian. We moved her from the state of Mississippi. You know, she was under the care of my parents until they passed away. And guys, just moving my sister, there is no doubt that she's permanently disabled. The federal government has declared her disabled since she was 8 years old. She's now 61. Just moving her from Mississippi to Florida, she was without insurance for 9 months. It took 9 months for the state of Florida to confirm and evaluate her and to interview her and to put her on the Medicaid rolls. So when I, as a physician and as a caregiver, when I see 41 other states basically accept free money from the federal government to expand their programs and expand their services, I do have to question why the state of Florida is one of the 9 holdouts. And guys, I know it's too complicated to get into in a show format such as this, but basically holding out from Medicaid expansion has actually benefited us, believe it or not, because you know what the feds have done? Those remaining 9 states, they keep upping the ante. They keep offering more incentives. The most recent Republican state to accept expansion, to accept the federal dollars, was North Carolina. And in addition to taking those federal funds and covering, I think, in the neighborhood of 400 to 600,000 poor and indigent people in the state who were going without insurance, they also got an additional, I believe it was an additional $1.8 billion from the feds to do with as they will. You know, they didn't have to necessarily spend it on Medicaid patients. I think in the state of North Carolina, they're using it to build more hospitals. So again, I think at this point, it's a financial decision for the state of Florida. It's not an ideological decision. At this point, it would be like being against Social Security. Look, I don't like Social Security. I'm not a huge fan of Medicare myself. I would love to privatize everything that the government has their hands in, but at some point we have to be pragmatic. Social Security is never going away. We have to admit that. Medicare is never going away, at least not in my lifetime. Too many people have paid into that. Well, now we're looking at Medicaid, and with what happened with Medicaid in 2011, initially we thought, okay, well, this isn't going to last. Well, now 13 years later, I think it's safe to say that Medicaid expansion is basically the law of the land now. And like Social Security and Medicare, it is also never going away. So at this point, for the feds to offer us dollars that if we turn them down, you know, it's not like we get a refund, guys. You know, did anyone get their Medicaid denial refund check in the mail last year? I know I haven't. I haven't gotten one for 13 years. When we turn down free federal money, the feds take those taxpayer dollars from Florida taxpayers. They don't refund them. They send them to places like California and Oregon, so that those states.
So I assume, Representative Rudman, that you've told this story. Hearing your story, I'm sure you've shared it with Governor DeSantis, because when you hear this story about your sister, that changes my heart on this. I have to say.
Yeah, but you know, Veronica, you got the other side of that too, and I'll make the case for that. And that with that Medicare expansion comes a lot of strings that are not paid for by the federal government that obligates the citizens of the state of Florida to pay for it. And therefore the budget.
So John, I hate to be a rude guest, but I'm going to stop you right there.
That's okay.
That is actually misinformation. You're using talking points that are 10 years old. Now you're talking to a physician, right, who sees Medicaid patients. I've got someone on Medicaid in my family. Those were the old talking points from 2011. People were afraid that the states were going to be on the hook. We are now 13 years into this. This is no longer an experiment. This is the law of the land. The feds are never going to pull that rug out from us. Now, you are correct. The deal with Medicaid expansion, the feds give you 90% of the money to do the expansion. You have to make up the other 10%. Now, what we're learning, John, what conservative states are doing, states like Louisiana and North Carolina, they are not raising taxes. They are not raiding the coffers from other programs, you know, from infrastructure or places like that to pay the 10%. Do you know what they're doing, John? They're asking the state's hospital to pony up the remaining 10%. And do you know what they're doing in Louisiana and North Carolina? The hospitals are happy to, because with expansion, they're no longer seeing deadbeats. They're no longer giving, ER care to the tune of $50,000 to these indigents, knowing that they're never going to see a dime of it. These people are now covered by Medicaid. So hospitals, they're no longer seeing all this uncompensated, all this uninsured care. They are making so much money on the deal that they are happy, John, to pony up that remaining 10%. So you were right. There is a cost involved, but that cost is not going to be borne by Florida taxpayers. It's going to be borne by our state's hospital. And we could also, like I said, with the incentives they're offering, we could turn around and use that incentive money as the 10%. But again, those are decisions above my pay grade. As Veronica said, that's where you got to get the governor involved. That's where you got to get the executive branch involved to figure out, are we going to do this? And if so, how?
Well, it's definitely a complex and very dynamic, because, you not only with the Medicare expansion, you also had that phenomena now of physician practices being bought up by hospitals and these huge chains that are you're losing your individual doctors. Go try and find an independent pharmacist anymore, because everything's being bought up by CVS and Walgreens and everything else. So that you had this huge consolidation going on, and the cost shifting, and frankly, the hospitals are making money hand over fist, as you pointed out, in these other states, and could probably afford some of this stuff.
Well, and the thing is, trust me, I'm no supporter of the hospital politics. That's why I'm in private practice. No one owns my practice. I run it myself. But the hospitals, as far as I know, John, I can't think of any other business. I can't think of any lawyer. I can't think of any accountant who, when a person walks in off the street with an awful tax return or an awful legal case, I can't think of any other occupation that has to provide the service to that person regardless of their ability to pay. But yet we make our hospitals do that. And so when I work these rural emergency rooms, I've worked places like Atmore, Alabama. I've worked places like Chipley, Florida, places where, 6 out of every 10 ER patients that I see, they have absolutely no insurance. So that $50,000 bill I'm handing them, the hospital's having to.
I guess my problem is I live in some kind of fantasy that I think it could be that the medical system can be fixed. That the government distortion of the pricing mechanism is possible to fix that. Maybe like I said, maybe it's a fantasy that because we have friends of ours that are doctors and stuff, and I talked to them about the reimbursement stuff being, it's just there's no, it's completely disconnected from reality. They depend on private insurance companies are actually footing the bill. People that are paying, companies and people that have private insurance are actually the ones paying for all of this stuff through these huge charges. And then, every time I get a bill from a hospital or anything, it says, here's, and then look what the insurance company paid. It's like $20,000, was the bill from the hospital. The insurance company negotiates it down to $1,200. So what's the real cost?
That was my new knee 2 years ago.
Right. Is it just so distorted that you can't apply any kind of reality, some kind of norms to this problem?
Well, and John, that you're absolutely correct. And to underline, right, to highlight what you just said, I'm going to bring this back into the political arena. So back in the day when I made the decision to go to medical school, you probably remember these days, guys. You'd go to the doctor and, okay, maybe your visit was $100, and half the time you just whip out your check and write the check for $100. There's no big deal. Yep. Well, that was in the day of what was called usual and customary fees. That was back when doctors set the rates, and they would honestly tell you, look, this was just a strep throat. I'll take $25. What happened, John, under the Bill Clinton administration, Bill Clinton changed how Medicare treated physicians. Instead of us sending Medicare the bill every time we saw an elderly patient with Medicare, Bill Clinton said, no, Medicare is going to set the rate. And you know what the rate's going to be? The rate's going to be a fraction of what these doctors asked for. So, John, you can imagine your country doctor who asked for $25. That was literally all he needed for that strep throat. That would literally pay his bills. But then when he asked Medicare for $25 in the Clinton era, Medicare would say, okay, we're going to take our 80% discount off of that, so you now get $2. And that's where you see this huge disconnect. It all started with the Bill Clinton administration, and certainly the Obama administration continued these policies. Again, they want Medicare to set the rates, and every other insurance, they take their lead from whatever Medicare does. So that's why you see these awful, awful bills, from hospitals that say you owe them $100,000, and then you look at what they actually get, and they get somewhere along the lines of $20,000. Because if they asked for $20,000, they would get $2,000.
So Doc, what are
is it fixable?
Right.
So again, John, I like to tell people that I'm pragmatic. You are 100% right that it needs to be fixed. And John, I know we're running short on time here. It almost was fixed. Under the George Bush era, you had physicians going to accepting cash only, and you still have that in some communities. When I opened my practice back in 2004, 2005, everyone in Navarre said, you don't need to take insurance. You should just take cash only. That way you could lower your prices. You won't have the overhead. You won't be fighting with insurance companies. You won't have to pay a billing company. So believe it or not, the system was moving away from insurance, John, in the late 2000s. But guess what happened? Obamacare happened, where they passed that law requiring every American to carry insurance or pay a fine. So we were headed in the right direction until Obama took office, and we all know what he did, and that's where we went astray. And so I'm with you, John, but do I think there's any way of going back? In my opinion, if we were going to go back and fix it, we had the chance under Trump when we had a Republican Congress and a Republican president, and we still couldn't get it done. So at the end of the day, I have to be pragmatic and work with the system I'm in. I wish we could blow it up and start over, and I would certainly be in favor of that. But for right now, I've got to work with the system I've got. And for me, it's, hey, if Biden's going to throw federal taxpayer dollars at places like New Hampshire and Massachusetts, if he's going to send Florida taxpayer money to Maine and California, I'd rather that Florida taxpayer money stay here in the state of Florida and insure more Floridians.
I love it. So what are we missing, Representative Rudman? We could talk to you all day, and
I know, right?
You're wonderful, which I've been dreaming about this interview.
Here, so the weather here, I'm actually up in George Clooney country. I'm up here by Lake Como, and the weather was supposed to be like 40 degrees, but the sun's out. It's 80 degrees. I'm wearing jeans and a long button-down shirt. So I'm about to go hang out by the pool. But you know what, guys? Let me leave you with this last thought. So like I said, my wife and I, we like to travel. We like to see how other people live across the world. Guys, let me tell you, more people need to get out and see the world, because as soon as you leave the United States and you see how these other citizens in other countries live, you will come back and you will kiss the ground of the United States when you land. Because, guys, like I said, I'm up here in George Clooney country. I'm looking out my hotel window, and there are hovels out here. There are abandoned buildings. There are torn up fences. The liberals like to tell us that we're the only country with infrastructure problems and we're the only country with poverty. That is not true. I am in Italy right now, and even though I'm in probably the richest part of Italy, out my back door, it looks like a third world country. I would not trade Navarre, Florida for this. I would not trade any part of Florida for Italy, for France, I just wouldn't. And anyone who tells you that Europe does it better, ask them if they've ever visited Europe, because I don't think they have. I don't know. My wife and I were talking about that this afternoon when we were walking around the village here. We're like, these liberals, they want us to live like, I'm looking out and I'm looking at apartment buildings. I'm looking at these individual, in our country, we'd call them projects, because they're so small and they're so built one on top of the other. To think that an entire village lives like this, and they're in different states of disrepair. I would encourage people, don't listen to the liberals. When you have these Hollywood types get on TV and tell you, oh, France does it better, Italy does it better, we should all learn a lesson from Europe. No. The lesson we learned from Europe is that we had to go bail them out in World War II. They should be taking lessons from us because we are the last bastions of freedom on earth. And no, we're not changing to benefit Europe. We're going to keep doing what we're doing to benefit Floridians and all of America.
Well, it's been a pleasure. We are going to have you back. And I told John earlier, after meeting you and researching you, I want you to run for Congress. So I'm going to start that here. Tell your wife I'll be your campaign manager. And because we need you, Doc. I mean, you've been fabulous. And I just love how you're fighting for us.
System. Yeah, we need people like you to help get up there and fix this system.
Guys, I tell you what, I'll leave you with this last thought. I think when you're talking to people across the state or across the country, I think the key is if you have someone who is running for office for the wrong reasons, if you have someone who's not willing to walk away from the job. Y'all remember all the great Republicans we've had in Congress over the last 20 years. You'll get people like Trey Gowdy, and all of a sudden they'll just say, okay, I'm done.
Right.
Those are exactly the kind of people you need. You need people who are willing to go to the mat. And you know what? This is not my life. This is not my career. I'm here to fight for my state. I'm here to fight for my country. But I'm not here to fight for the job because the job sucks. The job is, like you say, it's the sausage getting made. And any person who wants to kick and scream and use negative campaigning and use lies and innuendo to win a position, those are not the people you want representing you. You want the people who really don't want to be in Washington. You want the people like Matt Gaetz who really doesn't want to be there. You want people like me, people who don't want to be in Tallahassee, but we're serving your interests. We're there because we know if we're not there, there's going to be no one left to stand up for you. So help me keep Republicans in power in Tallahassee. Help us keep a supermajority in Tallahassee, because those friends of mine I mentioned earlier, the Kevin Steeles of the world, the Bernie Jacques of the world, the Cayenne Michaels of the world, you'll notice they are all Republican, and Lord knows I need them back next session. So please help me with that, guys.
Well, God bless you. We've been speaking with Florida Representative Dr. Joel Rudman from District 3 and live from Italy. So ciao, and we'll have you back, sir.
Ciao, Bella.
We'll be right back on Veronica Live.